I don't see the Ukrainian people giving up, as it were, and not being prepared to fight on.
No.
And I don't see the key Western allies giving up either.
So look, we've heard now, we've been listening to Volodymyr Zelensky talk about his needs, about a Ukrainian victory plan, but what is the reality of what victory might mean in Ukraine?
Well, President Zelensky obviously sees victory as sort of complete victory for Ukraine, which is Russia immediately or eventually withdrawing from all Ukrainian territories, including Crimea. That doesn't look very realistic in the short or medium term, I have to say, but that's clearly what he is considering to be victory. At the moment, we've got a situation where Putin is losing, but Ukraine is also losing. No one is winning from this conflict. And he is very worried, obviously, with a potential change of American president, well, a definite change of American president, that American policy will change and that he will be under pressure to compromise on a insufficient peace deal, which isn't going to be sustainable in the longer term.
Yes, I mean, in conventional terms, in a conventional war, victory means one or other side accepting defeat, with or without a surrender and any formal statement of that kind, but accepting that they are beaten and withdrawing and an end to the fighting in that way. And as you said, that's not remotely likely as things stand. Ukraine says no compromises on the occupation and control of Ukrainian territory. In other words, the plan from Ukraine's point of view is to fight and keep on fighting.
Well, yes, until the will of Russia is sapped. I mean, they're both deploying, if you like, the same strategy. Putin is hoping to degrade the infrastructure, the energy supplies of Ukrainians, so that the Ukrainian people beginning to get sort of fed up with the war and are more likely to accept peace at any price, whilst Ukraine's Western allies sort of fall away. I don't think that's very likely to happen. I don't see the Ukrainian people giving up, as it were, and not being prepared to fight on. And I don't see the key Western allies giving up either, although some of President Trump's comments obviously attach some concern. But I think Russia will have been heartened in recent months by the fact that quite a few of the middle ground, traditional middle ground, are less sort of sympathetic to Ukraine, or perhaps more sympathetic to Russia, than was the case 2.5 years ago when they invaded.
Well, I want to come to that, if you like, diplomatic dimension in a second. But in New York now, and on his way into New York, the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is saying that this is not just about allowing the use of British Storm Shadow missiles to strike against targets inside Russia, but that obviously is important, very important from Ukraine's point of view.
I think it's extremely important, and probably the biggest takeaway that President Zelensky can get from this trip to the United States is agreement by President Biden that the shackles are removed on the use of systems like Storm Shadow to hit Russian military targets inside Russian territory. That could be a game changer. I mean, it wouldn't be instantly a game changer, but it would certainly change some of the dynamic of the current conflict and make it much more difficult for Russia to target Ukrainian infrastructure, as they're able to do relatively easily at the moment.
So ahead of today's diplomacy in New York, we were, as it were, waiting for President Biden to give the thumbs up, the green light to the use of those British missiles, because America has a key role in the use of those missiles, in targeting and in other things. Is that American permission, Mark, inevitable? Because it looks as if we've been just inching towards that day by day.
I hope it's inevitable. I'm not 100% sure that it is, John, because why has it taken so long? That decision arguably gets more difficult as the American elections get closer. I've been rather surprised that this debate has been played out in public, because that only benefits President Putin, because it's given him the opportunity to sort of escalate the rhetoric and say such a decision would mean NATO entering the war against Russia. And that obviously helps him domestically, but also helps him with some of the middle ground at the United Nations. So I think it's much better to have taken a decision in private and just get on with it, as it were, and presented as a fait accompli, but that's obviously too late for that now.
Yeah.
So I hope it's inevitable, but I'm not convinced myself that it's completely inevitable.
Well, and we've discussed more than once before now the truth of Vladimir Putin waiting to see the outcome of the American election in November, hoping presumably for a change of administration, and Donald Trump, who can be expected because he says he will step in and seek a quick resolution more favorable to Russia on any analysis. What about, in the meantime, other allies of Ukraine in Europe, for example, and war weariness among those European leaders? How significant is that?
It is significant. We're seeing it particularly in Germany, which is, in sort of total financial terms, been the biggest European supporter of Ukraine. But Olaf Scholz is clearly under some domestic pressure internally himself, and there doesn't seem to be a great appetite in German public to continue to support Ukraine in the way that it has, let alone increase either the financial contribution or, more importantly, perhaps for Ukraine, giving more sophisticated military equipment to Ukraine. So that is certainly a concern. I don't think there's much lessening of support in France, Italy, but certainly in Germany, that is a big concern.
Okay, you can imagine and now see the sense of urgency, certainly on Volodymyr Zelensky's part. Needs obviously to talk about the parallel conflict in Lebanon. We've seen more of the Israeli bombardment of southern Lebanon just in recent hours. On Israel's side, they say, look, it's up to Hezbollah effectively to stop the fighting. So that the fighting goes on there too. There's no sign of any kind of diplomatic breakthrough. What place is there left for international diplomacy where Lebanon is concerned? Any at all?
Well, certainly not at the sort of UN level. But again, the Americans are working on this. I mean, they do have an envoy in the region that's trying to put together an agreement between Hezbollah and Israel, and has been for some time. But obviously, the recent escalation on both sides makes that, I think, very difficult, certainly in the short term. I think the Israeli government now thinks it has the upper hand. It has Hezbollah on the defense. A lot of their military commanders have been killed. Their communications networks been damaged. A lot of the fighters have been killed or injured. And so they feel that they're actually sort of winning militarily this conflict and can sort of force Hezbollah into submission through purely military means. I'm not
Okay.
sure myself whether that is possible given Hezbollah's history, but that seems to be the Israeli tactics. So they're not interested in a ceasefire at the moment, and Hezbollah is just in survival mode, but showing that they still have some capacity by firing missiles, including for the first time a ballistic missile directed at the most populated city in Israel, which is Tel Aviv.
Yes. So as things stand, the most international flights out of Beirut airport are being cancelled today. If you were in your old role as national security advisor, would you now be saying that we need to get active on the evacuation of our nationals from Beirut, using maybe military
Well,
evacuation?
yes, I mean, I think clearly that has been happening over the last few days. We had the Cobra meeting in last Friday, another one yesterday. Troops are being forward deployed to Cyprus. There are some British troops already in Lebanon, I think, sort of still supporting the Lebanese armed forces, the official Lebanese army. And we do have some ships in the region. So a lot of the military assets required for an emergency evacuation are there. But I don't think it'll be deployed whilst there still are some flights flying out of the international airport. And Beirut itself, which is where most of the British nationals probably are living, is not itself being targeted. Western Beirut, yes, Bekaa, the southern Lebanon, but at the moment the city and the infrastructure of the city isn't being targeted by Israeli bombardment.
Yeah, although I think there are no British flights out of Beirut, only Iraqi and Iranian and Lebanon airlines.
Yeah. I mean, Lebanese flights are still flying, I think, including to London.
Yeah.
So, there are some possibilities there still. We don't know exactly how many British nationals left in Lebanon, probably around 10,000, something like that. So an evacuation of that number of people would be extremely difficult.
Yes.
And I think even if the government activated the evacuation plan with military assistance, or military assisted evacuation, I'm not sure that all the British nationals would actually leave because they have Lebanese family members still there, or they may feel that they themselves are safe, whatever happens.
Okay, Mark, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.